So you want to shoot. So we're going to be shooting our visual effects films. And most of you guys are either going to be using your phone or a DSLR. And I'm just going to show some very quick settings you can do to try to pull the most out of whatever system you wind up using. There are some things that I think that people should really avoid, and there are some things that I think that people should really make sure that they do. So it's just going to be a really quick, basic overview of all that. The first really important thing that I think that we should cover is depth of field. And there's a lot that goes into depth of field, and I shouldn't say there's a lot. There's a lot of simple things that go into depth of field, and honestly, phones don't handle it well, at all. A lot of phones will use AI, basically AI resources to fake depth of field when there is none. And that can be a really huge problem if you're trying to shoot and then now you have to compensate for the depth of field that was made when it's not real depth of field. Calculating depth of field is based upon, the amount of light entering the barrel of the lens, and then you calculate the distance between the lens and your subject and everything like that. And then everything out of focus, it's all mathematics, it's all math based, and it's all based in reality, and the AI stuff is not based in reality. It's something that's just added on in post, which can make for some really difficult shooting times, or difficult editing times, I should say, when you're trying to match your bokeh, you're trying to match your depth of field in post, and you literally can't match it because the systems that you use are normally they're geared towards working with actual lenses, and they're not geared towards working with AI bokeh. So you just have a really, really difficult time trying to do that, I think. The next thing is something that's related to DSLR shooters and camera shooters alike, and that's specifically shutter speed, and making sure that your shutter speeds are correct. A lot of times where you'll see in footage there's this kind of choppiness to footage, and that's caused by shutter speeds that aren't linked to the actual film speed. Okay, so you're shooting at 24 fps, then your shutter speed should be 48, 1/48. The shutter angle, which is what I use and what I'm using right now on my Cinecam, is 180 degrees. And that's a rule. That's not necessarily a rule that's so heavy set that you need to completely follow it no matter what. It's not this type of thing that says, oh my goodness, you have to use 180 degrees. It's the only thing. And to be fair, I only really shoot at 180 degrees. But if you want a lot of motion blur, you can shoot at 1/24 seconds, and that's matching your frame rate. So 360 degrees for the shutter angle, I should say. You can shoot with other values too, and say you shoot at 24 fps and your shutter speed is 1/60 or something like that. You can achieve an effect with that where you'll still get a bit of motion blur, but you have a little bit of choppiness because the motion blur will end before the frame ends, or it will continue into your next frame, and then you have smeared frames, which doesn't always look super good. That's why you don't go over 360 degrees for your shutter angle, or you don't go over your frame rates with your shutter speed. But say you were filming a lot of action scenes, say you're filming an action scene and you wanted to have a bit more clarity, you can bump your shutter speed up and you'll get a little bit more clarity out of it, but there's a certain amount that you should approach it with, and you kind of got to know what looks decent and what doesn't. Otherwise you'll get footage that's just kind of looks amateur. And I'm not trying to say that I'm this professional, well, I am professional to a degree, but not the greatest filmmaker to ever exist. And this isn't some rule thing that is I follow all the time, even though, well, I do. I shoot at 180 all the time. But the point that I am making is that you don't necessarily, you want to, how do I say this? You want to get the most out of your footage, and you want to get the most out of a limited system like your phone, because you can go really far with a phone, but if you're not shooting right, you're gonna shoot phone footage and nobody's gonna like really enjoy it a huge amount. And for us, it's okay. You know, we're shooting a visual effects thing. We're trying to get a subject. It's like whatever. But if you're going to the length to get Filmic Pro or Moment has their other camera app or whatever too, because Moment makes lenses and accessories for phone filming. If you're gonna go to that length, you may as well try to make the most out of what you're using. So make sure to just, if you're gonna shoot at 30 FPS, then have your shutter angle be 1/60. So you're shooting at 1/60 shutter speed. So your shutter angle, I should say, is 180 degrees. If you're gonna be shooting at 60 FPS, which is like really smooth, and that's kind of ambitious for a VFX short, then make sure you're shooting at a shutter speed of 120. Shutter angle is still 180. I'd probably recommend not shooting at 60 FPS because you're just doubling the amount of frames that you then have to render and post, which is literally doubling the time. If you have a 4-hour render to make, you're looking at 8 hours. Like, just shoot at 24 or 30, I think, for this project. I'm gonna like suggest that. But if you really want to shoot like slow-mo or something, and then have the frame rate be 24, then yeah, shooting at 60 FPS is totally reasonable. So yeah. So the next most important thing to think of is framing. And you can see right now, if I'm sitting here, if I'm sitting up, then I'm like out of frame a little bit. But like when I'm leaned over, speaking to you like this, I'm gonna have third lines on the screen, which should be around here-ish on me. The most important thing to think of with third lines and composition is just like, compositions tend to just look a lot better when you maintain them. Just keep the eyes on the top third line. Keep a subject, if they're going to be off to the side, don't go beyond the far right or left third line. The apps that you're going to be shooting on, like no doubt, have the overlays for the third lines that you can use. I'd really recommend just keeping subjects within those third lines for just easy, simple composition. There's a lot of different videos on composition that are out there that you can go and take a look at, but I'm not really going to explain it too much here, but I'm just going to say make sure to use your tools right, like make sure to use those third lines and compose your shots like well, because as far as I know, not very many people in here are actually filmmakers. You're visual effects filmmakers, which is a totally different ballpark, but you don't necessarily, or you may not necessarily have the right ideas of composition and framing in mind when you're shooting this stuff. And yeah, it might not turn out like the way that you would expect it to when you're in post and you're like, oh, it feels like it's off kilter, it's because you might not have framed them up properly. So, and even right now I could be recording this and it's all framed improperly. I don't even know. Okay, so I'm shooting this as an example of something not to do. You can probably even see that as I move back and forth here, I fall in and out of focus, and that's because I'm trying to shoot like the most bokeh-licious, beautiful, like out of focus background, whatever. Don't do this. Okay, so the reason why you don't do that is I'm shooting at I was shooting at T2 here, which is like f2.1 or f2.2, whatever. Don't shoot like crazy bokeh stuff, because again, as I said before, you're gonna have to like literally go back and then render everything out of focus back there, or else it's not gonna look right. And then you're just making like so much more extra work for yourself. Like, it's so easy to do this on DSLRs and everything like that. And like, yeah, you can just do it. You can shoot at 1.8, but like f1.8 is not gonna get you anything that's like easily kept in focus unless you have an AC like me. If you want to hire me for like a week, a week, like a day, like a couple hours, then come out and shoot and keep focus for you. Like I can do that, but like people aren't gonna have the ability to like necessarily spend money on this type of stuff and buy an AC, buy AC services to keep their shots in focus, and you don't have the time to try to manually mess around and keep people in focus as you're shooting as well. It's like, yeah, you can do it. You can set your focus with like a out of depth of field. If I could speak right, you can set your focus manually and then have people come in and out of your frame, or you can move your frame and follow along with them. Sure, whatever. But regardless, it's still going to cause problems with you. Right now, I'm shooting at f3.5. Okay, I shot a little bit earlier at like f4, like on my 12 millimeter, which is over there. I was shooting at f4. I choose t4, so it's like f4 point something. The point is like, you don't need to shoot this like crazy bokeh stuff to have good looking footage. And that's like a really big trend that's shown up from all these other videos that you guys are probably gonna see. Because you're probably gonna look up how to shoot movies or how to shoot film stuff, and you're gonna see all these blogs from 2016 that are like, oh, we do this, we shoot with f2 and f3, and f3 is getting like into a better position. But the point is like, that's a trend. That's a trend from like the mid 2010s, and like you're gonna be dealing with footage that more than likely will not be shot at f2. It'll be shot professionally. It'll be shot at like T4 or like 5.6 or like 8, 11 up to 16. After 16, diffraction starts setting in and you lose sharpness. But the point that I'm making is, you don't need to have this like, this super bokeh image to have good shots. Just have good composition, have good pacing, have good editing. And then for this thing, just like literally just point and click. You have one shot to make. Edit it if you want to. Just make things easier for yourself, and don't shoot it like f1.8. It's not like crazy difficult, yeah. Another thing that you'll see from my shaky Nikon footage here is that I have a tripod, and in my hands right here I have a little GorillaPod. This thing isn't actually a real GorillaPod. This is like some projector tripod thing that I got for $10, and it fits my camera. I can just like screw the camera into it and it works fine. These things are like $5, and like a GorillaPod is like $10 or $20. You can get them for your phones too. Just consider shooting with a tripod, because you don't necessarily need to have to like shoot this whole motion, you're moving around doing crazy dynamic things, because you're just gonna have to solve that again later in SynthEyes. A lot of tripod footage or a lot of really slow moving footage is what looks good. You don't need wild stuff to like go out. You don't need to get a gimbal and do some sort of like some crazy following your subject and orbiting around them, and then suddenly, whoa, there's a monster like in the corner there. It's like, sure. Maybe that's part of like a set for a film that you're getting that you have to work on. Sure, okay. But like you shooting this stuff, like it's, unless you know what you're doing with them, it's probably gonna not turn out the way that you would expect it to or really want it to. And you're just gonna wind up running into like a bunch of problems later on when you're trying to track stuff. And now you have to have your camera follow an object moving that's going through the world, and the camera solve has to be in orbit now around them. And like SynthEyes can do it, but like I feel like you're just gonna introduce like 1,000 tracking errors, and then suddenly you're trying to put something in there, it's just not gonna work. Just keep things simple. And with a tripod, it's even more simple, because you stick it there and the camera's like looking forward and you draw the lens. We already learned how to do that. Or SynthEyes can even calculate the lens distortion for you, and it just does it all. It's super easy. You should just consider using it, and then you can have like little pans and tilts and whatever. Like you can have like little camera moves within there to keep your subject in frame. Sure, whatever. That's fine. That's up to you. But you just don't need to have these like crazy camera moves. Unless you really want to do handheld stuff, in which case, sure, like handheld, whatever. It's up to, it's your shot. Like do whatever the hell you want. But the point that I'm making is that you can make it a lot easier by just getting a tripod. So it's just a good thing to think of. So the reason why I shot this on film to begin with, and the reason why I did everything, is just to put what I say into practice and to show that these things work. This entire video was shot with decent enough composition. Like this is a little bit weird because I'm shooting at 2:35 versus, you know, the usual aspect ratio of like 1920 by 1080. But the point is you can still divide things into like thirds along here, you know, like you can see I have a bunch of negative darker space here. I have some light and stuff like that. And even edited after this, I'm going to be showing a clip of a light that I was using. And I was using a fill light to fill in the edges of my arm and put this, you know, this stuff in here where I'm not just totally like contrast heavy or whatever. And then I have a light in the background. And it's like, this stuff didn't even take me 30 seconds to set up. I picked up the lamp, stuck it down, turned on the light, and then just like flicked on my fill light after positioning it in a spot that I thought was decent enough, which is like kind of like 3/4 off of the screen, like over here essentially. And that's easy. And the thing that I was just gonna say, which is the final bit, is just to use light in a way that is interesting to you. And you don't have to buy a light. You don't have to go and like find some LED kit and set it up or whatever. Most of me in this shot is lit by the sun. It's over here. It's just right out the windows. I just have like a window right over here. So I'm just using a bunch of natural light. And then it looks good because I'm following all the rules that I was just trying to teach. I'm on the rule of thirds. You can see my eyes are just about right here. I could decide to, if I want to crop in, I would keep the eyes in the third lines, and just keeping them there just makes sense. The lamp is in the third line over here, and this is still using composition like I said. And I'm not using crazy depth of field. Like again, like most of this stuff is pretty much in focus, which means if I were to add VFX in here, it would be easy to render. I don't have to render depth of field and suddenly try to guess my focus distances, because that is not going to work out very well unless I know the focus distances. And I can figure things out and I can solve, and it's just like, I can do the work, okay? And you guys can do the work too. It's not the worst thing in the world to try to do the work. It's just a lot of extra difficulty. And so you may as well just shoot in a way that is conducive to the visual effects project and just do the easiest thing in the world. I shouldn't say easiest in the world. Like focus on the effects and then make the filmmaking easier for yourself by just shooting to make it easy. And just having the right settings makes it easy. This whole project has taken me about an hour and a half, maybe, to do. Like I started at 1 or something like that. Like I shot some things earlier. And the reason why I'm doing this too is because I want to practice with my lighting. It was an easy lighting setup. I was able to practice, sure. But like this didn't take me long to do and make this video. And I just wanted to show it and illustrate exactly what I'm talking about. Rather than trying to find pictures online and say, hey, you guys can do this. You can share the video and just watch it and see it all there, and it's all laid out. And that is what I wanted to show. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope that this was somewhat insightful for you, and that you can just take the 3 simple things that I taught, which is rule of thirds, don't go crazy with the bokeh because it's kind of weird on phones, and use a little bit of lighting if you'd like to. And I taught some other stuff in there. I threw in some other things and whatever, you know, whatever. Take care, guys. Bye.